Many wrestlers come and go from the WWE, but when a wrestler leaves the WWE, a return is never ruled out, and we often see wrestlers return back to WWE, and sometimes they have a much better run than they had before. But in some cases, a wrestler returns and it goes very wrong, and being a completely pointless waste of time. Today we're going to discuss a few of those cases, so like and subscribe, and let's talk about WWE returns that went wrong and clearly had no plan. In March 2011, it was announced that Australian wrestler Tennille Dashwood had signed for the WWE. She wouldn't properly begin in the company until summer of the next year, where she would be sent to FCW with her ring name soon after being changed to just simply Emma. And soon after that was when FCW rebranded to NXT, and she would be a big part of the early NXT women's division. She would start racking up some wins and would get over with the NXT crowd, as she would then be entered into a tournament to crown the first ever NXT Women's Champion. She would make it to the finals, but would come short to Paige, who would win the thing and win the NXT Women's title, and this era of the NXT Women's division saw Paige and Emma as its top two people, and they could be credited for helping usher in the women's revolution in WWE from the early days. She'd spend the rest of her NXT run in pursuit of the title, but would always fall short, and Emma would then be called up to the main roster in January 2014, and upon call up, she was paired with Santina Marella and pretty much established immediately as a jobber. She would actually keep going in NXT at the same time until June, where she was still near the top of that division, all while jobbing on the main roster, sort of showing the divide between Triple H and Vince's booking. In 2014, Emma also got released from the WWE, but then was reinstated and rehired hours later in one of the most unique WWE firings ever. Basically, story is, she was arrested on the 30th of June for, checks notes, forgetting to pay for an iPad case on a self-checkout machine. Yes, you heard that right. This was of course obviously accidental. She ended up doing only 1 day of community service for this. It was nothing serious. And it was confirmed that this iPad case purchase was part of like a full shop where everything else had been paid for except the iPad case, which kind of proves it was accidental. Why did I even need to explain that? What a weird case. The criminal case, not the iPad case, to be confused. But through this all, creative lost interest in Emma on the main roster, as in January 2015, just a year after her call-up, she returned back to NXT. She would soon after debut a new heel persona and a new look, and it was a nice change for Emma, and she was being presented as a serious competitor once again in NXT. Being involved in top-level women's programs, but once again never winning the title, she was called back up to the main roster in March 2016, just in time to be part of that Total Divas tag match at WrestleMania. Do you remember that? Post-Mania though, she would start feuding with Becky Lynch and even got a win over her on TV, and she was then joined in alliance by the newly called up Dana Brooke as their feud with Becky Lynch continued, and this looked to be a new start for Emma on the main roster. But in May of that year, she would suffer a back injury at a live event where she would require surgery and have to be taken off TV. It wouldn't be until October when Emma's return began being teased, as vignettes began to air teasing the arrival of the newly repackaged Emmalina. And these vignettes would continue for weeks, teasing that Emmalina is coming, and then they'd continue for months to the point where it felt like a rib. These vignettes lasted for 4 months before Emmalina finally arrived, just to announce that she's changing back to Emma. What was the point in any of that? Well, supposedly WWE felt she couldn't pull off the character they wanted with her. Only took 4 months to realize that, I guess. And Emma would revert back to her old character and look, and pretty much back to jobbing again for the rest of 2017. Though at the end of the summer, they seemed to be doing more with her, as she was part of the Raw Women's title match at No Mercy in September, and the next month she would face the newly called up Asuka at TLC. Of course, she lost both of these matches, but it was a nice surprise to see Emma on 2 pay-per-views in a row. But just 1 week after her match with Asuka, she was released from the company, which was surprising as it seemed like she was finally doing stuff on the main roster. If it had happened like 3 months before that, maybe it wouldn't have been as surprising, but it seemed like they had just started something with her and then just abruptly stopped it. Emma would return back to the indies as Tennille Dashwood and would work for various promotions including Ring of Honor and TNA, where she had a women's tag title reign. But when Triple H came into power in 2022, many wrestlers would be signed for returns, and one of those was of course Emma. She returned on the 28th of October SmackDown and was straight back to jobbing. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't expecting Emma to be a main eventer or anything in this run, but in this run, they didn't even try with her, and her signing felt completely pointless as she just jobbed for her entire run, and in less than a year, she was released from the company. As she found out, she was released on the day that WWE announced a big show in her home country of Australia. Man, that is tough. Harry Smith, aka David Hart Smith, is the son of the British Bulldog, and he was signed to the WWE in 2006, reporting to OVW. He was then sent to Deep South Wrestling, where he would start teaming with TJ Wilson, aka Tyson Kidd, and then when FCW formed, he would be part of the Next Generation Hart Foundation stable, alongside Tyson Kidd, Natalia, Ted DiBiase Jr., and none other than Teddy Hart, who of course got fired months into this. David Hart Smith would spend a few years in developmental, and this was by his own choice, as WWE did actually draft him to SmackDown in 2008, but he never debuted as he wanted to stay in FCW and keep developing. Eventually in 2009, he would finally make his way to the main roster and debut alongside Tyson Kidd and Natalia as the Hart Dynasty. They were drafted to ECW at first, and they would debut as heels and start feuding with teams on the brand like Crime Time, but they were drafted to SmackDown in June. And they had a couple of shots at the tag titles that year, including against D-Generation X, but would of course fall short. And 2010 would then see the Hart Dynasty rise up quick as they turned face after aligning with Bret Hart after his Mania match with Vince. And Bret would start accompanying them to their matches and be involved in their matches and feuds, and they would start feuding with Show Miz, who were the tag champions, and they were the team to beat Show Miz in a gauntlet match at that year's Extreme Rules, which earned them a shot at the belt, and shortly after on an episode of Raw, they would defeat Show Miz to win the belts. They defended the belts successfully against Jericho and The Miz, the Usos, and the Straight Edge Society before losing them in a four-way match to the team of Cody Rhodes and Drew McIntyre at Night of Champions in September. The Hart Dynasty would fail to regain the titles, and then for whatever reason after, WWE began teasing a breakup of the group as tensions began to rise between Smith and Kidd. And on the November 15th Raw, this would all culminate when Tyson Kidd turned on Smith during a tag title match with the Nexus. Tyson Kidd and David Hart Smith would trade wins on Raw and Superstars during their feud, which also saw the introduction of Jackson Andrews, if you even remember this guy. But this feud was abruptly ended, and David Hart Smith was relegated to appearing on B shows like Superstars, and Smith's last WWE match would end up being on the 28th of April Superstars, as he was released months later in August after not being used for that whole time. He'd return back to the indies, where he would go hard for the next few years, and towards the end of the decade would gain some prevalence for his MLW run, where he was part of the New Hart Foundation alongside Brian Pillman Jr. and Teddy Hart once again. How do I always find a way to mention Teddy Hart in any of my videos? And then in 2020, it was announced that David Hart Smith's father, the British Bulldog, was being inducted in the Hall of Fame, as himself and his family accepted the award on his behalf, and this opened the door again for Smith in the WWE, as he wrestled a dark match in June, his first WWE match in 9 years, and was signed back to the company days later. It was an interesting signing, and I was interested to see what they do with David Hart Smith and how it would compare to his last run from nearly a decade ago. But lo and behold, they did nothing with him. He was released just 5 months later without a single appearance after signing, not a single word about him, not even a dark match, his name never even mentioned or announced that he was signed officially. Like, literally, what was the point? Eva Marie was signed to the WWE in 2013 for one reason and one reason only: Total Divas. Total Divas was the new reality show that WWE were a part of, where it would follow and document the lives and drama of WWE divas behind the scenes. And Eva Marie was signed to the WWE purely to be a part of Total Divas. In fact, despite having a performance center opening very soon, Eva Marie was shot up to the main roster immediately with only 2 weeks of training. And when you watched her matches, it very much showed. Eva Marie quickly became known as possibly one of the worst WWE wrestlers of all time, and would botch in nearly every match she had, and she had no business being in the ring at all. And after her first year of wrestling and some of the worst wrestling you've probably ever seen, Eva Marie would take a hiatus due to injury, and during this hiatus would get extra training from Brian Kendrick, and when she returned in 2015, it was in NXT. And early on in her NXT run, she showed a lot of improvements and looked a different wrestler, and even the crowd were on her side. Well, that was until she went back to her old ways and forgot to kick out in a match against Billie Kay, which caused the NXT crowd to turn on her. But despite this, her NXT run wasn't too bad. She mixed it up against some big names and was one of the top heel women by the end of her NXT run, before she was called up to the main roster again. And after she was drafted to SmackDown in the 2016 draft, she would debut a new character which would see her avoiding wrestling in any way possible, with an over-the-top announcer for all of her entrances. It was actually quite entertaining, and it also meant that we didn't have to see her wrestle, so win-win. However, Eva Marie would disappear from TV after she was suspended for 30 days due to wellness violation, but despite this suspension being only for 30 days, Eva Marie wouldn't appear again on SmackDown or for the WWE, and after she was inactive for over a year, she was released from the company in August of 2017. And just like that, the Eva Marie WWE experiment was over. Until she returned in 2021 for absolutely no reason. She returned in June of 2021, now aligned with Doudrop, aka Piper Niven. What a stupid ring name that was, Doudrop. What? This was a rough time for the Raw Women's division, as you had top workers like Asuka and Naomi losing to Eva Marie and Doudrop. We also had to endure the Eva Marie versus Alexa Bliss singles match at SummerSlam that year and their feud that came with it, because yes, they did have Eva Marie versus Alexa Bliss on the second biggest pay-per-view of the year. The match was awful and saw Eva Marie be defeated before Doudrop turned on her, and she'd have a couple more matches losing to Doudrop on TV, and then was beaten down by Shayna Baszler to write her off TV so she could go film a movie, but she'd never return as she was released due to budget cuts in November. And this time, the Eva Marie WWE experiment was finally over. Guys, that's it from me. Let me know in the comments down below what you think was the most pointless signing in WWE history. Also, All Out was last night. What a crazy show that was. Let me know what you thought of AEW All Out in the comments down below as well. I thought the show was just nuts, like I said. And like the video, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more wrestling content just like this. I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye, and keep on rolling.